Good morning, everyone. Let's get underway again. I detect a quorum, and we're back in business. Glad to see all your bright, shining faces. Any requests or announcements before we get underway here? Okay. Thank you. We're going to begin, if I have it right, with the TVA. Is this the TVA pilots? Report behind tab 6. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Executive.
I can barely hear you.
Okay, let's see here. How about that? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. All right, just a reminder, in 2009, the legislature passed the Electric Cooperative Generation and Transmission Act, which authorized the creation of nonprofit cooperatives to own and operate electric generation and transmission facilities in the state of Tennessee. The bill at the time was motivated by a desire on the part of TVA distributors to have some ownership position in the distribution network. As a result, they formed a nonprofit corporation called Seven States Power Corporation, which at that time took an ownership position in a generation facility in Mississippi, South Haven, Mississippi. After the original act was passed, there was some concern over the possibility that these new entities could impact the TVA payments in lieu of taxes, the pilot, received by the state and Tennessee local governments. As a result, in 2010, that law was amended, requiring that any payments, either property taxes paid locally or through the TVA pilot, would go through the same allocation process that's authorized by a Tennessee statute, Tennessee Code Title 67, Chapter 9. The objective of that was to try to hold harmless the state and local governments and state agencies resulting from any changes in TVA's supply system. And as a part of that amendment, the legislature directed the commission to monitor those any changes in the supply system and any potential impact that might have on the pilot, and to make recommendations, if need be, to changes in the Tennessee tax code to adjust that. And so tab 6 is this year's response to that directive. Again, just a reminder, the TVA Act of 1933 directs the Tennessee Valley Authority to set aside 5% of its gross proceeds, that is its revenues, except for those that are from power sales to federal agencies or within the internal usage of the authority, to make that 5% available to states in which TVA owns property and or generates power. Over the history of the Tennessee Valley Authority, the state of Tennessee has typically received about 60% of that money. This year, slightly more than 60%. And in federal fiscal year, let me make that point. We're talking about the federal fiscal year, October 1 through September 30. The payments to Tennessee and to the state and to local governments total about total $330 million. Okay, we're talking about substantial monies. Every year, at the beginning of every fiscal year, the TVA estimates what the payments are going to be for the coming year, and then makes payments to each of those states in turn. And each state then allocates that money to its own within the state based upon its own methodology.
Thank you. We have a question from Mayor Huffman.
Yes, sir.
Just quickly, Dr. Kyle, there are TVA in lieu of payments, and then there's a direct payment, it's called, that's made. How is the direct payment? How's TVA figure how much the direct payment counties should be?
Well, those direct payments are based upon two things, I think: impact fees and impact fees within those local communities, within those counties. Actually, that money is a very small share, about $3 million, and as a matter of fact, I think we had some discussion about that last year, did we not?
It's not much money in our county. We're just a medium-sized county. It's less than $2,000, but I never could figure out how it was calculated or really what it was for.
To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know exactly how it is calculated. I'll find that out for you.
Thank you.
Lenise has Lenise.
They do that based on the value of the power property that they took over, whenever it was that they took that, whatever the property taxes were at the time, which eons and eons ago that would have been, and that's why the amounts are so small.
But whether it's the direct tax or the in lieu of tax, whether direct payment or the in lieu of payments, none of those legally are considered to be taxes, right?
Well, again, I mean that's a legal issue that I don't
In
really
what respect?
know about.
Industrial in lieu of payments are not considered to be taxes. That's been ruled on years ago. I'm just trying to get clear about our TVA in lieu of taxes treated from a legal standpoint the same way industrial in lieu of taxes are. That is, it's a payment, it's not a tax. Because if it's a payment, it's treated differently or can be treated differently by local governments. If it's a tax, then that.
The one thing that I'm familiar with where it makes a difference is in a county where you've got multiple school systems,
right,
as you had with Covington years ago, and the TVA payments are not subject to the division between the multiple school systems that other state and local taxes are.
Right. So
because they're federal.
So those payments are as flexible money as I guess we'd call it locally. It wouldn't have to be distributed according to the tax rate.
Right.
All I can add to that is that within the budget, within the state budget, that money is listed separately from other tax sources. So it's not. I don't think that it's included as considered tax. Okay. Well, back to the estimation. They do that at the beginning of the fiscal year, and so that's why we got the latest when we got the latest numbers. Then at the end of the fiscal year, if there's a difference between what their estimates were and what the actual revenues were, they make that up at the end in the last payment. So consequently, oftentimes in September, you get a little extra money. Excuse me. The estimated total for this present fiscal year, fiscal 2013-2014, in the case of Tennessee, is $328 million. Okay. Last year, 330. This year, 328. That's down a decline of $2 million. And unfortunately, that follows a decline from the previous year of $17 million. So we've had very rare event. We've had two consecutive years when the payments in lieu of taxes have gone down. There's a table in the tab 6, table 1, which gives you the total payments since fiscal 2008. So you can see it. And again, in past years, oftentimes there have been significant increases from year to year. So this is a very, as I say, a very rare event. There are a couple of reasons why this has happened for the declining payments. First and foremost is the state of the economy, the recession of 2008, 2009, and the slow recovery from that contraction. Secondly, in calendar years 2012, 2000, and 2013, TVA's largest single industrial customer went out of business. Okay, that accounted for about 5% of TVA's revenues. So knocked a chunk out of the payments in lieu of taxes, about $7.5 million.
Who was that? What was that? What company?
U.S. It's in my footnote there. U.S. What's it called? Just a second.
Oh, I see. U.S. Enrichment.
It's in
U.S. Enrichment.
in Kentucky.
Okay.
U.S. Enrichment Corporation is the name of it, which was some kind of hybrid organization, and which was counted as a private entity in any case. So as a result, those revenues did go into the calculation of payment, the pilot. Thirdly, a third factor was an emphasis on energy efficiency. And that's energy efficiency, improving efficiency within the TVA distribution system by its distributors and by TVA customers. I mean, the fact of the matter is that electrical appliances are becoming more and more energy efficient. Finally, the other factor recently was the weather. I mean, we've had up until the last couple of months, we had very mild weather for the last couple of years, and that decreased the demand for power and consequently decreased TVA revenues. When we first, just to put this in perspective, when we first started doing this report, I talked to the financial forecasters for TVA, and they were using an estimate of annual increases in revenues of 2% per year. And at the time, we thought that was pretty modest. Okay, well, bad news is after these declines, now their estimate for the future is that their revenues will grow less than 1% a year. So, again, we think that it's important to make everybody that receives these payments aware of the fact that Tennessee, the TVA pilot is not going to be as generous as it may have been in the past. Concern about the TVA supply system derives from a number of, let's call them new for TVA financial arrangements that they have been using to fund new power generation facilities. In late 1979, the Congress imposed a $30 billion limit on TVA's debt. Okay, again, within the tab 6, there's a chart that shows you their debt since I think it's 1999, and you'll see that it's varied quite a bit and goes up and down to stay within that $30 billion limit. The new financial arrangements that they have used have involved a number of leasing arrangements. I warn you there. I'm just a simple-minded economist. I'm not a financial expert. I'll leave that to Dr. Chervin, my friend Dr. Chervin, to explain those intricacies of sale and leasebacks and lease and leaseback taxing arrangements. In any case, in order to meet a number of things, probably single most important factor are changing economic considerations, namely the relative prices of natural gas and the other possible fuel sources that TVA uses to generate power, plus some agreements with they reached in, I believe it was the fall of 2011, they reached an agreement with the Environmental Protection Agency to close a number of coal-fired steam plants, 6 of those in the state of Tennessee and a number and some others in the other states, to shift away from the use of coal toward other energy sources to generate electricity. And as a result of closing some facilities, opening new facilities, acquiring new facilities, and expanding some other ones, there's the potential for at least shifting the distribution of the pilot. All right, and to some extent that's already happened. Fortunately, none of them have negatively impacted the state of Tennessee. So in order to accomplish these changes in their supply system and to stay within the $30 billion debt ceiling, they have employed a number, as I say, of financing arrangements, sale and leaseback, and so-called lease and leaseback facilities. At this point, we can say that none of those things has impacted the pilot for Tennessee. But again, in the future, that's not guaranteed. An example of these things, and we've talked about this before, is one the facility in actually two facilities in Mississippi. One in South Haven, Mississippi. As I say, in 2009, about the same time this bill, the original bill, was passed, a group of TVA distributors formed this nonprofit corporation, Seven States Power Corporation, and they bought a share of the ownership in this South Haven, Mississippi plant. At the time they did that, TVA continued to operate the plant, so the revenues passed through TVA's system, and consequently there was no change in the total payments received. However, in the state of Mississippi, because this plant was privately owned, it was subject to local and state property taxes in Mississippi, and as a result, there was, like the direct payments, that came off the top of Mississippi's pilot payments. There's another plant in Caledonia called the Caledonia Steam Plant. It's located outside of Columbus, Mississippi. All right, same sort of thing. And as a result, the state of Mississippi lost. I mean, again, from the payments from TVA dropped about $6 million. $6 million. Now, the counties and perhaps the state, I don't know if they have a state property tax or not in Mississippi, but in any case, they received property taxes from those entities that owned those facilities, so that the total package of money was still the same, but again, the distribution within the state of Mississippi was changed. So that's a possibility for the state of Tennessee. They have within the state of Tennessee, the closest thing that's to that situation occurs in East Tennessee, with a lease and leaseback arrangement in the so-called John Sevier plant near Rogersville, Tennessee. But under TVA's, again, this is some of the details of this are included within the tab. Under TVA's policies, leased properties are considered their properties, and as a result, it doesn't affect the payment. So far, there's no change in Tennessee. Again, the potential is there. There's also the potential from the expansion of the nuclear facility in Watts Bar, okay, which is still under construction. That's exactly when that's going to happen, when that's going to take place, is still up in the air. I'll come back to that in just a second. But in any case, there is a potential for that to happen. Could be to Tennessee's benefit. Okay, it could be that generation is shifted from other places, notably Alabama, possibly Mississippi, to Tennessee. Whether or not that would actually impact the payments in lieu of taxes to Tennessee is uncertain, because of the way they calculate that, way they determine the amount of the pilot that goes to each individual state. So in the longer term, one factor is going to be this shifting of power sources within the Tennessee Valley Authority. under their latest so-called integrated resource plan, the TVA board identified some goals for power production in the future by fuel source. Again, that information is in your tab. It doesn't give a definitive timetable on this, but the long-term plan is that that 40% of TVA power will be generated by nuclear fuel sources. Okay, 20% by coal. Wasn't too long ago that 80% of TVA's power was generated by coal-fired steam plants. But the 20% is the goal for the future, 20% for natural gas facilities, and the remaining 20% will be distributed across a number of different things, including energy efficiency. Energy efficiency means selling less power, sell less power, less revenues, consequently fewer, lower payments in lieu of taxes. Right this minute, again, I think there's a table in your tab which shows this, 43% of TVA power was generated by coal-powered steam plants. So we're going to go from 43%, we did what, 80%, now 43% down to 20%. Okay, and the natural gas, if you look at the natural gas generation, it's now about 9%, and it's going to go up to 20%. And the nuclear stuff is going to increase a little bit. So in any case, what they're calling rebalancing is going to take place, and it very well could happen, could impact on the distribution of the pilot. So we know that's going to happen. We just don't know how how it's going to play out and what timetable it's going to follow, and it could potentially impact the pilot in the future. So it'll be the staff's responsibility to monitor that and to keep track of what happens and to try to anticipate any potential impact on the pilot.
Senator Kyle.
Well, I'm just curious if anybody in Memphis today asked me what I learned, I'd like to be able to tell them. What does all this mean to like people like MLG&W that are like sole source purchasers from TVA and all like that in regards to the ability, I mean, from rates in the future, long term. I mean, it really is one of the great benefits of from an economic development standpoint in Memphis is our air, water, and B, our utilities. And I'm just curious, what does this aspect of it impact?
Yes, sir. Well, the only thing that I can say is this: that it's important. I think it's important for everybody that gets a piece of this money to understand that it's volatile. You know, it's not going to be as reliable. Particularly a reliable year-to-year increase as there has been before now, and there are going to be changes. Again, I think there are going to be changes in the distribution of how the power is generated. So there will be an impact on suppliers. Yeah.
Well, do we monitor how they manage the various utilities manage this money?
No, sir.
I mean,
we have not done that.
Would that not be something just to be aware of? I mean, are folks spending it like this money is here, or that they're being, let's say, put some type of? I mean, I'm sure the books of records. I imagine every possible way of using that money it is used one way or the other. But it would seem to be just from not that we would have any direction as to tell them how to do it, but I do think the fact that people know they're being watched on how they do it might make them do it a little more prudently.
I have considered in previous meetings in anticipation of this one, drawing attention to this report with some kind of a cover letter or a cover email, not only to legislators. I remember last year or 2 years ago talking with the Commissioner of Finance here in Tennessee about the TVA in lieu of payments, and I didn't get the sense that we were following it too carefully in state government ourselves. But then, the direct payments, the to the extent they go to the schools and all that, everybody just needs to be on their toes about it. Ruben?
Let me just point out that have had inquiries recently about that very question, Senator Kyle. As a matter of fact, where's Cliff? You go to a meeting about that. We had a question from West Tennessee, Southwest Tennessee Development District about the possible use of some of that money. And the only thing that we can say is that that there's in Title 67, I don't believe there are any restrictions on how that money can be used. Back to the direct payments, we had a question from, where was it? In East Tennessee, about somebody questioned about those impact fees. Where oh, for crying out loud, someplace over there by Chattanooga. Where was that?
We have a bill filed in this session, I know by Senator Overby, that would request that something like 0.005% be diverted to local development districts. And that's just, that's an accounting function. I mean, the state's going to have to look carefully at whatever it's doing with its 48.5% to begin with. Yeah. It's a very small amount, but that's probably part of the basis for that
very
inquiry.
Well could be, yes, sir. But in any case, those questions have come up. But again, within the Tennessee statutes, I don't believe there are any restrictions on how the money can be used.
I'm sure that TACIR is the only, as tasked under that 2009 Act, TACIR is on top of this, probably the only readily available resource for information about these payments. So, yes, sir. Mayor Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cowell, the Allen Steam plant in Memphis is a big plant. TVA owns, as I understand it, and it's been operating for years. It's a coal-fired plant, and my understanding is they're going to convert from coal to natural gas. Do you know if that occurs, what impact that has on Memphis and Shelby County and the TVA in lieu of payments they have? Are there any instances in other areas of the state where they've shut down, converted?
I don't think it would have directly would have any impact, because the way that the things are calculated is based upon, well, first of all, TVA's calculation for the whole state. Remember, they're not the ones who distribute it, but for the whole state, what their calculation is based upon the property owned and the power that's generated and sold in that state. Okay, so switching from one fuel source to another by itself wouldn't have any impact. And again, within the county, within the TVA the Tennessee's distribution system, I'm not sure would have any impact at all.
All right.
Oh, thank you, sir. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Lanice reminds me that this is an action item. We need to approve this report, so I'll entertain a motion that we do so. And properly moved and seconded. Thank you, Mr. McMahon. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right, the report is duly approved. Thank you, Ruben. And next, David Lewis, behind tab 7. A lot of people have been anticipating this, looking forward to your work here on the subject of foreclosures as an impediment to remedying blight. A lot of there's several initiatives underway. Senator Kyle has been focusing on this as well. So thank you, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
This study came about at the request of Senator Kyle. The commission instructed staff to study these issues, and we have looked in tab 7 about how the protracted foreclosure process has affected local government's ability to deal with the problems of blight related to foreclosures. And I am getting the hang of the microphone here. So we're continuing to work on a report that addresses these issues, but this is an update that we wanted to provide to everyone so that you can see what work has been done and is ongoing. And after I give my presentation, answer any questions along the way, and answer any questions at the end of my presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stan Shervin, who is going to discuss how the housing collapse and financial collapse happened in the first place, and the incredible complexity of the issues relating to housing and foreclosures. And first thing I would like to do is just let you know what I'm going to be talking about in terms of other states. There have been several alternatives implemented in other states and in cities in other states, and I'm going to discuss them in a little more length, but I wanted to let you know that some options that have been done in other states and cities and other states are to change the trespass law to enable neighbors to maintain vacant and or vacant and blighted properties in their neighborhoods. Another is to require servicers to post bond anytime they go to foreclose upon a property. Another is to implement mediation programs. Yet another is to increase civil and criminal penalties for failure to maintain blighted properties. Some cities have actually attempting to use eminent domain to seize underwater mortgages. Other states, some states have tried to reduce the time to foreclose on properties. And also there have been the implementation of vacant and foreclosed property registries or registration systems. In 2012, the Commission made some recommendations for addressing blight generally, and in the 2012 report dealing with blight strategies for Tennessee's communities, those were pointed out, and the Commission may want to consider reiterating any of these recommendations. The recommendations included expanding statewide the Neighborhood Preservation Act, which allows any neighbor or interested party to sue the owner of a property not maintained to community standards. There was the Residential Rental Inspection Law, which authorizes a municipality to establish a residential rental inspection program for deteriorated or deteriorating properties. The Vacant Properties Acquisition Act authorizes the use of eminent domain to acquire, hold, manage, and dispose of vacant blighted property. And also the Local Enterprise Zones Law allows certain local governments to provide incentives and exemptions to qualified businesses and residents in depressed areas, including exemptions from any local rule or regulation that doesn't have to do with health or public safety. Additionally, state law already allows municipalities, but not counties, to establish an Office of Hearing Officer, and the Office of Hearing Officer could hear cases and could impose $500 fines, which far exceed the $50 allowed under the Constitution. The Commission recommended that it might be advantageous to extend similar authority to county governments or to otherwise provide for the higher $500 fine. Additionally, the legislator in 2012 authorized a pilot land bank program in Oak Ridge, and that pilot is in the early stages of being implemented. The Commission recommended that after the comptroller studies, as is required in the Act, that the Commission might want to look at that again, and they recommended that extending land bank authority statewide based on the findings of the comptroller might be in order. Wanted to point out some things that are already going on in Tennessee dealing with the problems, and as a way to categorize them, one category is trying to keep people in their homes in the first place. The idea being that if it doesn't become vacant, that then blight can be prevented, property will be maintained. Obviously, there's that's still not perfect, and this is very consistent with the federal policy in this area. A great deal of federal policy and programs have been all about. Yes, sir.
Mayor Rowland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, one question back to the $500 fine. Is that daily or is that in total?
I would have to refer back to that report to be sure. I believe. Well, I just don't. I can't.
All
I
right.
can't speak
Sorry, interrupted.
It's
Thank you,
okay,
Mr. Chairman.
no problem. We can get you that information. Actually, perhaps one of my colleagues will get that information as I speak. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So one way that there's been an attempt to keep people in their homes is through actually paying mortgage payments. And the Tennessee Housing Development Agency has a program called Keep My Tennessee Home, and they actually will pay up to $40,000 over 36 months to help people be able to keep their homes. And they'll pay current or past due payments, and these payments or partial payments go straight to the servicer so that there's no breakdown in the money getting where it's supposed to go. And they've made almost 5,000 of such loans, and this is a statewide program, and they have also extended. Earlier the program did not have as much money, and they extended additional loans to some folks who had not been able to participate in the full length of the program. That was about just over 324 homeowners there.
I was speaking to the THDA gentleman earlier this week, and they indicated that because of the settlement that the state of Tennessee is participating in with that mortgage company, that they're expecting more payments to be able to, more resources to be able to in regards to home and home foreclosure. That's a part of a nationwide settlement with one of these folks who did very well for during the or helped bring on the housing crisis or whatever.
Thank you.
Mayor Waters.
On the THDA program, you said that they were are they loans or grants to the homeowners?
That's a very good question. They are loans, and they're prorated. I believe over a 5-year period, if the people stay in their homes and maintain the homes and make payments, then on a prorated basis, the loan will be forgiven. All right. Thank you. For folks who have long-term medical issues, the Tennessee Housing Development Agency also has a long-term medical disability program, and they've helped about 350 homeowners through that process. Another major thrust of keeping people in their homes has been counseling, and that's been happening through the National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program, and that's a federal program that, again, Tennessee Housing Development Agency is administering in Tennessee. And using those funds, they've been able to maintain an extensive network of 17 foreclosure prevention counseling agencies with over 60 counselors that can serve homeowners. Again, this is statewide. And there's no cost here, and there's no income cap. They'll help anybody. And through the second quarter of 2013, they had helped almost 13,000 Tennessee households facing foreclosures. In 2012, again, THDA, in partnership with the Tennessee Office of the Attorney General and Reporter, created a toll-free hotline for citizens who are experiencing problems making mortgage payments, or are about to be foreclosed on, or concerned that they're about to be foreclosed on. And this is funded through the National Mortgage Settlement. There's actually several settlements. This was the largest, a $25 billion settlement that 49 states and the U.S. government reached with the 5 largest mortgage servicers. And another resource that is useful in terms of counseling to help people know what their options are in terms of their situation is the Hope Now Alliance, which was formed by industry leaders in the mortgage industry. And they have implemented a multi-state tour that where homeowners can go and borrowers can go talk to their lenders and talk to counselors. Sometimes they're multi-day events. In 2008 in Memphis, there was one such event. Another is actually scheduled for next month in Memphis. One was held in Nashville in 2012. They also have a nationwide toll-free hotline that will provide counseling to folks. And since 2008, they've provided over 12,000 counseling sessions with Tennessee homeowners. So that was trying to keep people in their homes. Now we've got the issue, okay, not everybody, can't keep everybody in their homes. What do we do with these vacant, foreclosed properties?
David,
Yes.
1 second here. Eilif?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick question
Yes, sir.
on the THDA loans you were talking about. There's a no-interest loan program and a no-interest and a low-interest loan. Which one were you talking about, or which one does it apply where it's forgiven after, if you follow so many conditions, after 5 years the loan is forgiven?
That would be the no-interest loan.
Okay, that's the no-interest.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that means that they pay while they're there, and then if they meet certain curricula or criteria, I should say, if they meet certain criteria, then the loan is forgiven.
Yes.
At the end. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clear that up. Thanks.
And in case some people know about the federal program, the hardest hit program, that would be the funding source behind the loans. Okay.
Mayor Waters?
Just a quick question about these loans and the counseling and the various resources that folks would have if they get in trouble. Do the banking institutions, are they talking to the citizens about if they have someone in trouble, about getting how does the information get to that homeowner that's having trouble? I guess is my question. Are the banking institutions involved in that, or are they just foreclosing and you've just got to find out where you can about these programs that might help you survive?
That's a really good question. One of the actions that lenders and servicers are supposed to take as a part of the various settlements that not all but many have been involved in is that they are supposed to be doing outreach, letting people know about their situation and what options might be to do a loan modification. They're supposed to be letting people know even about the possibility of short sales or deed transfer in lieu of foreclosure. Now, that's what they're supposed to be doing. I do not have enough information to verify or cast any doubt. So that's what they're supposed to be doing under a lot of the federal initiatives and the legal settlements. Okay, thank you. The big issue, or a big issue, when you're trying to deal with vacant foreclosed homes is that if you have a medium value property or a high value property in a neighborhood that's doing pretty well, generally the market is working. Not always, but generally. And the issue is when you have a low value property in an area that is having a lot of foreclosures, may have had some issues even before the crisis. And what happens sometimes, a property that's not as valuable doesn't sell at foreclosure auction and becomes real estate owned. You might hear someone referring to REO properties. That means real estate owned. The issue there is then you have to then at that point the servicer and lender are supposed to be taking care of the property and dealing with its reuse. And the way that a lot of local governments have been working on this issue, a couple of the ways are through housing authorities and through the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. And the Neighborhood Stabilization Program was another federal program that was to try to help with the whole problem of vacant houses due to foreclosures. And they provided emergency assistance to state and local governments to acquire and redevelop foreclosed properties that might otherwise become sources of abandonment and blight. And there were 3 rounds of grants here. The first provided grants to all states and selected local governments on a formula basis There was a second round that provided grants to states, local governments, and nonprofits on a competitive basis, and the third was also a formula. The total amount received by Tennessee and all its cities together was $113.2 million. If you look on page 5 of tab 7 at table 1, you can see the amounts received by the Tennessee Housing Development Agency on behalf of Tennessee. And also you can see the amounts received directly by Chattanooga, Knoxville, Memphis, Nashville, and Shelby County. In addition to the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, housing authorities are also an important tool for acquiring and redeveloping blighted properties. And under the Housing Authorities law, the housing authorities have fairly broad authority to completely redevelop properties and entire sections of a community. Under existing laws, local governments also have the authority to require owners to maintain vacant properties, or in the failure to do so, the local government can maintain them themselves. A number of Tennessee laws enable local governments to do this. You can have owners remove trash or overgrown vegetation. You can have owners remedy dangerous or defective building conditions, and if they do not, the local government has the authority to go in. And code enforcement programs enable local governments to identify blighted vacant properties and take steps to rehabilitate or demolish them. Under existing law, local governments can also place liens on properties when owners have failed to maintain them. An example of where some of this is being done in Tennessee in a coordinated way is in Memphis. They have a 25 square initiative where they're going in and tackling 25 square blocks at one time and with a large crews, and they have do everything from simple mowing of overgrown yards to raising buildings if they are past the point of no return. Okay, next so I've talked about some things that are already going on in Tennessee. I'm going to now talk about blight-related strategies to foreclosure that have been implemented in other states and in cities in other states. The first I'm going to discuss is changing trespass law to allow neighbors to take care of vacant properties. The idea here is that people are often very nervous to go onto a neighbor's property because they would be in violation of trespass law. And Indiana was also having a lot of issues with a lot of vacant foreclosed homes, as well as other vacant homes. And they changed their law to allow neighbors limited immunity to go on and not do anything malicious, but to take care of the property. You can mow the grass, you can landscape, you can trim the shrubbery, and they felt like it was going well, and they actually amended it this year to allow dealing with graffiti. You can actually go on the property, paint over it, clean it, deal with the graffiti. And I forgot to mention also, if you noticed your neighbor's house has been broken into, you would have the authority under this to secure the property on the exterior. You're not allowed to go in the property, but it would allow you to secure the property. And one of the issues here is that, as I mentioned a moment ago, local governments have the authority to place a lien on a property. You might take care of a whole bunch of properties in your neighborhood, but you're not going to be able to put a lien on them. So therefore, that property doesn't have yet another burden when it goes time to redevelop, resell that property. Something else that's being done in other cities, in other states, is to require servicers to post bond for each foreclosure. And the Massachusetts cities of Lynn, Lawrence, and Springfield have passed ordinances, as well as the Ohio cities of Camden and Youngstown. I think that's actually supposed to be Canton. I think that might be a goof, yes. So they've passed ordinance requiring servicers to post a $10,000 cash bond to the city at the start of a foreclosure. If the property deteriorates, the city can use the bond for maintenance and repair. If the property is not maintained, the local government can use up to the entire $10,000 amount reasonably to take care of it. And if it's taken care of, the balance of the loan minus any administrative fees would be returned. Yes, in those ordinances, it would be for any mortgage foreclosure, not for a tax delinquent foreclosure, but for a mortgage foreclosure. Yes. These are in various stages of implementation, and there has been a good deal of resistance on the part of the real estate and mortgage communities, and there have been legal challenges here. So this is one of the things that we're continuing to research to make sure that we understand the various issues. It's a good question. Thank you. Another strategy has been to implement a mediation program, and these have been done in statewide, formally in 19 states. We have not done it in Tennessee, and also some local governments in other states. In 6 states have implemented such programs. A couple studies suggest they appear to be in generally successful programs, and in 2011, there was actually a bill introduced that would have required the Tennessee Housing Development Agency to study whether or not to have a statewide formal mediation program. The bill did not pass, but the THDA completed the study anyway, and they found that there would be some value to such a program, but there would be some cost, and there would need to be identification of eligible mediators, such as in other states they've used retired judges, attorneys, professional mediators, and certified housing counselors. And so some states have implemented these and then later rescinded them. We're still studying this issue as well. Another approach has been to increase civil and criminal penalties for failure to maintain blighted property. And what this is a lot of states having big problems felt like they really needed to do something. So one example is Pennsylvania. They've given cities authority to file criminal charges against owners who fail to address property code violations, and if they're from out of state, to even extradite them. And they can also place a lien on an owner's assets, and they can keep them from being able to get building and zoning permits, and they can also charge the offending party for all the costs of dealing with this in the first place, all the administrative costs. Michigan also recently passed a set of new laws increasing penalties for failing to pay fines related to blighted property, and they allow local governments to pursue criminal charges, garnish wages, and impose other sanctions on folks who don't comply. Another strategy, which is controversial, is to use eminent domain to seize underwater mortgages. And the idea here is not to use eminent domain to condemn a property. The idea is to use eminent domain to condemn and acquire the mortgage. And cities would be offering fair market value to the mortgage holder regardless of how much is owed on the loan. So if I owed $120,000 on my loan, but the house was only worth $75,000, the idea would be to give the lender $75,000, then based on some investments from outside investors, to renegotiate a loan with me for the $75,000. Federal officials have said that they will not support this, that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will not be able to buy any mortgages like this on the secondary market, and that could very well have the impact of drying up almost all mortgage financing in a community that would do that. Another idea is to reduce the time required to foreclose on a property, and a few states have already taken steps to attempt this. Tennessee already has a short foreclosure period compared with other states. Based on data from RealtyTrack, which is a national company that provides real estate data and services, the average time to foreclose on a property in Tennessee was 209 days in the third quarter of 2013. And the average time varied from a low of 164 days in Texas to a high of 1,037 days in New York. And the national average was 551 days. And one thing that has to be kept in mind is this is happening while the federal government and various settlements are telling people to slow it down. So this is already with the impact, whatever that impact has been of that. And another issue is judicial states tend to be slower in terms of foreclosing, and non-judicial states like Tennessee tend to be faster. In a judicial state, a mortgage secures your loan, and the title is actually with the borrower. The reason it's called judicial is they have to take you to court to get you to give back the title. In a non-judicial state like Tennessee, the loans are secured by deeds of trust, and the title is actually at the trustee. So it's much easier to get the title from the trustee than it is in a judicial state from the borrower. 3 judicial states that have attempted to do something about the time to foreclose are Illinois, Florida, and New York. And Illinois passed a law that would allow banks to foreclose on abandoned properties in as little as 90 days, and the key here being abandoned properties. And the idea here was that they were concerned that servicers were spending almost all their time in foreclosure proceedings and not really spending much of their time on marketing and repairing, rehabilitating, and marketing properties. So the idea there being, let's get the focus where it needs to be. In Florida, they worked out a new law where banks would come to court prepared to prove that they own the property, that they own the mortgage, and that they have the right to foreclose. And in exchange, that would speed the process up. So it was supposed to be a win-win. What happened initially is that the number of foreclosures actually dropped pretty significantly by 70%. New York's taken a different approach. Through their Court of Appeals, they began working in 2012 to give judges more control of situations and to require banks to send a representative who can make decisions right then and there on the spot, so there wouldn't be going back and forth between whoever showed up to court and their management. Another strategy that's been implemented is to implement a vacant or foreclosed property registration systems. Some of these registration systems have been to register vacant properties, some of them have been to register foreclosed properties, and some of them are to register vacant and foreclosed properties. And the number of these actually jumped dramatically from fewer than 20 in the year 2000 to more than 550 in 2012. And the idea here is that keeping track of the vacant properties is not happening through the normal property assessment, codes enforcement process, because there's just so many of them in some situations. And there have been multiple responses to this. One, there's been several private companies that have implemented registries. One example is vacantregistry.com that has implemented registries for local government and will provide a range of services from property management to maintenance. So the private sector has moved in there to some degree. Additionally, this was not establishing such registries has not been popular with the Mortgage Bankers Association. They argued and worked with the mortgage electronic registration systems to allow local governments access to this system for free, MERS. It's an electronic registry designed to track servicing rights and who the owners of mortgage loans are. The issue here would be that even though that is available for free to local governments, not all mortgages are in the registry. Therefore, you could go to look up one and you couldn't find the information.
Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. MERS, last year I ran a bill to give the county and the cities access to that for this very purpose. I couldn't get a motion or a second, and the banking industry fought it every step of the way. So how are we getting that done? Because my clerk tells me that we can't get it done and that a lot of foreclosures are occurring because they can't figure out who holds the mortgage. For example, Senator Gardenhire told me last year when he co-sponsored it in the Senate when I lost so badly, that on December the 13th he sold 123,000 mortgages. And on January the 6th he sold them again to different owners. So they're being traded daily. So when you have to notify that mortgage holder that a default's about to occur, you're a lost ball in the high weeds. And so they come back to me. The bill proposed that they had to appoint a trustee in their deed of trust that would remain the person for notification forever. Well, they came back and said, no, we don't have that. We need MERS. I said, well, put MERS in the deed of trust. And they said, no, we won't do that. So my clerk stopped me the other day and she said, Representative Carter, we're dying on this foreclosure. I thought you were going to help us. I said, no, I can't. So you're telling me MERS now applies in Hamilton County and she doesn't know it.
Here's what I can tell you.
Okay.
I wanted to know, so I sent in an application for registration as a government representative, and I received the login information, and I was able to start looking for properties, admittedly randomly, and I wasn't looking at actual foreclosed properties like mine and fellow staff members, but I was able to get access to it, and I was able to tell that at least not every property is easy to find. I can't swear that it's not there, but I was able to fill out the information and get access to it and go and look around. Okay. That's how I was able to say for sure that not all mortgages are easily found, but I'll be happy to.
Thank you. Can I put her in touch with you?
Absolutely.
I mean, she's a nice lady, and she's really trying to do a great job, and it's really been frustrating for her. So sure. If you could do that, that'd be wonderful. And maybe since we failed on the bill, maybe they've decided to let us in, so I'm not sure.
It could be that I don't know. It could be that at the state level they're more quick to respond. I just don't know.
Well,
they
read
responded
ahead.
Very quickly.
Yeah, I read ahead and saw that, and so I was very excited about that. So if we've been able to accomplish that, then maybe that'll be a great thing. I hope so. Thank you very much. Great report.
Thank you very much. And if there are no more questions, I will ask Dr. Stan Shervin to come forward.
All right, before we segue to Stan, any further questions or comments? Senator Kyle?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to be on this commission much longer, and while I've got you all here, point out a couple things. One of the issues, this is all relevant and very good and very important, and it's work, and we may have additional information. The impediment that I see that we have is the constitutional impediment that we can't forgive taxes. I mean, if we could forgive taxes, then we could forgive taxes and property wouldn't have taxes on it, and therefore it might move and somebody might buy it, might fix it up, could make it economic feasible. What is the problem we have, as y'all all know, is that there's not economic viability to fixing up or repairing or renovating or redeveloping properties because you have such a huge tax burden. That's just our problem in Tennessee. So how do what do we do? I would suggest to you that one alternative would be that if a community wanted to participate, that at the purchase of a property, that there be an assessment on the buyer for an amount of money. But at the same time, we give that person who is assessed, let's just say $500, based upon value or whatever, we give them a credit for their future property taxes. And then, so what we've done is we've shifted. We didn't forgive taxes, but we shifted in the future. And therefore, the buyer of the property is, at the end of the day, you look at the end of the HUD 1 form, the money will be the same. There'll just be a transaction of one side for the buyer and a credit on the other side for having it occurred. And therefore, that community then has a fund to do what? To pay itself back for outstanding taxes. We have redefined the fund. We have redefined the fund, and essentially we've gone around the prohibition. We were then paying ourselves, but from an accounting measure, you're taking those taxes off the books. Now, a community shouldn't have to do this, but a community might want to do this. And I'll just say to you, but that is, to me, a strategy that this commission needs to look at, working with our staff and our fine people on how to get around that particular prohibition. Because in my community, when I have a piece of property that's worth $15,000 and there's $12,000 in taxes on it, no one's going to buy it just ain't going to happen. It just happened. I'll yield to the gentleman.
That's very consistent with what I heard from talking with local community development corporation officials and others, that those properties are very difficult to deal with. So that's consistent.
But if you want to shift and change the value of if you want to shift and change the definition of your dollars, then what you've done is you've created a pool of funds to where you could go and take 6 streets, and then all of a sudden you've got property that doesn't have a tax lien on it, and then the market value would determine. I'm just saying to you that again, and what we're doing is we can't forgive past taxes, but we give credits, ladies and gentlemen, all the time to people on future taxes. We give them credits if they'll locate their plant or whatever. There doesn't seem to be a prohibition on future, but there does. So if we can do this I'm just saying we create just as many jobs doing that than we would in the future. So that's just something for y'all to think about in the future on this particular matter.
I see our trustee, Mr. Cardwell's wheels turning down there as he thinks about this. No, but that's very creative. We will chew on that. Interesting. David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good report. Stan? Wonderful. Good to see you. You're welcome. And
this is the most convoluted subject I've ever had to deal with TACIR.
Thank you.
It's not something you get well trained on in graduate school, and of course my graduate school training goes way back to a point where we never even had to worry about what would happen if interest rates got to 0, because it was just a theoretical possibility. So if anybody else is frustrated or has been in the dark about this, join me, because I've never been down this road before. It was fun. There were so many books that have been written about what happened with the bust and the bubble. Movies have been basically filmed, and you may have seen several of them. The Big Short, there's been several movies that try to get in the complicated areas of this, and they are extremely complicated. And the good news is the smartest people in the world didn't know what the hell they were doing. A consistent fever, mania, thinking that property values could never fall, is at the core of most of what happened. And it wasn't just unsophisticated home buyers. It was the financial institutions themselves, many of which got stuck with their own bad stuff, and many of them, a leftover of Lehman Brothers here, which you could buy on eBay, because when Lehman went bankrupt, everything they owned went on eBay. The others were bailed out by somebody, the FDIC, the Fed, the U.S. Treasury, bailed out in various ways, in many different ways. AIG, with some weird little group they had in the background selling insurance against the possibility of home prices going down. an insurance company that didn't put away any reserves in case they ever did go down, and when they did go down, AIG went down. So I'm going to try in a very short period of time, skipping a lot, to try to talk about what happened. I'm looking for the next. There we go. Was there a bubble? You bet there was a bubble. The graph shows inflation adjusting housing prices back all the way before the Great Depression. Now, there are ups and downs in any type of economic activity, just as well as the economy itself goes up and down. But if you look at this, something dramatically different happened starting in the early 2000s. Housing prices did go up, but eventually they kept going up. Now, if you put a ruler there on the upside of that, a normal person would say, well, it can't keep going on forever. It's impossible. But what happened was, like happens with the dot-com bust, people get engaged with a flu-like system thinking, I got to get into this now before it does top out. And they never really get out of it in time unless they're extremely clever, or there's then the lucky factor. And what happened, it wasn't just the borrowers, the homeowners that got involved in this. It was the financial companies themselves who figured since home prices could never fall because it hadn't happened, basically looking through history for a very long time, whatever we do, there's always the homes, the value of the homes backing up whatever goes wrong. So if somebody stops paying on a mortgage, we'll foreclose, and we'll get most of our money out of it because we can get most of our money back from the sale of the home. The rating agencies, these fantastic rating agencies with some sophisticated algorithms trying to figure out how to put credit ratings on things, basically never focused a lot on what would happen if home prices fell, let's say 10 or 15%. Although in some of their publications they did say, even the unlikely event, this is how they covered themselves. The credit rating agencies aren't regulated by anybody. You pay them, they give you a rating. It's a strange system. So they messed up too, putting basically AAA ratings on stuff that ultimately turned on to be basic toxic and certainly not AA, not even BB. But clearly there was a bubble, and most of us didn't see it coming for various reasons. The same reason maybe we got involved in the dot-com bust back in the late 90s, because we wanted to be on board because it seemed like it was always going to go up. And when you think about it, why would you keep buying stock as the price is rising unless you thought that somewhere in the future the dividends were going to be coming in? And of course, finally somebody realized there couldn't be enough dividends to come in to justify some of the crazy prices some of those stocks were basically demanding back in the 90s. And at that point, when it went the O factor, one of the books I read said it was like Wile E. Coyote, who basically took a wrong turn, and he was out there in middle air, and it took him a while to realize, uh-oh, I'm about to go fall down. But for a while there, it wasn't clear that it was going to happen. And that's what happened when these things turn. Everybody's riding it up, and then there's some point they figure, uh-oh, and they all try to get out, and you know what happens then. It wasn't bad everywhere. Housing prices didn't simply double everywhere around the United States, and if you traveled around, you know that there were some places it was worse than others. Obviously, California, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, housing prices doubled, more than doubled, between 98 and 2006. The bad part about this is that meant no matter how much you had on your mortgage, all of a sudden your equity in that property jumped. And so what happens when your home equity jumps? And what a lot of people did, they pulled out that stuff. They pulled it out in home equity loans or home equity lines of credit and bought a lot of stuff. So the economy was really rolling along there during the 2000 period when home prices were going up, not only because the economy was humming. Construction, which is not a significant, and we forget this, it's not a significant part of our economy, but it was above average activity in construction. All of a sudden, everybody's feeling rich. Home equity's up. My net worth is up. I'm going to take some of that out and buy whatever they spent huge amounts of money that drove the economy a little faster than it otherwise would have been driven. And of course, when all that home equity disappeared, it disappeared faster than it appeared. All of a sudden, their spending patterns changed. Part of the reason we spend as much as we do in a given year is not only the income, that would be the most important factor, but it's how wealthy we are. If in addition to the income we get in a year, all of a sudden we have made a big hit in the stock market or something else, we tend to increase our spending because we feel richer, not because our income has necessarily gone up, but because our net worth impacts partly how much we spend out of our income. So we had a lot of problems, especially in those states that are in the blue, in the red, I mean. Tennessee really was only about 20%. Now, that doesn't mean in every neighborhood. The state as a whole, properties did appreciate on an average 20% during this period of time. In that way, it was probably a good thing because it wasn't as crazy as it was in those red states where property values doubled. And, of course, when the collapse came, things halved. So that's why you've heard about properties going from 400,000 to 200 or even more, 1 million to 500,000. When it was all over, what had been a housing bust wouldn't of itself have been the end of the world. When the dot-com bust came, it was not the end of the world. The economy picked up pretty quickly after it was over. What happened was the same thing that happened in the Great Depression. Great Depression started out with a stock market crash because too many people started playing around the stock market with borrowed money. The market rose significantly, very quickly, and then it just suddenly collapsed. If it had just been that, the Great Depression probably wouldn't have happened. What also happened during the Great Depression was the banking system collapsed. The Federal Reserve somewhere in Washington, D.C. has got this plaque that says never again, because what happened in the 30s, the Federal Reserve System was created to provide liquidity, and what it didn't do was provide liquidity. A lot of the banks had lent money out to buy stock. When the stock values went down and the people had to pay it back, they didn't have the money. We didn't have FDIC back then. The banks went belly up. If you had your savings account in the bank that went belly up, it was gone. You might recover part of it later as whoever the trustee for the bankrupt bank has to go out and try to sell the assets. It takes 10 years to collect all the money, so you might have gotten something back. But when all the banks started collapsing, 1/3 of all the banks in the United States collapsed during the Great Depression because there was nobody they could turn to help them through the problem. So what do you think happened to spending, household spending, when not only did the stock market collapse, but the banking system collapsed?
Representative Odom has a question.
It's about the current slide and the previous one. Tennessee was relatively low in the appreciation.
Yes, sir.
However, it looks like Tennessee is disproportionately represented on the number of foreclosures. It appears that Tennessee is more in line with what happened in California and Florida and some of the other areas for foreclosure. And I just wanted to know what was the...
Well, what happened here is, of course, that the extent of the foreclosures in Tennessee wasn't as bad as in California, because what happened here is the color, you get too many colors. The last color, red, we were probably at the low end of what happened in that particular classification. That is like a little less than one per 1,000, I think it is, of the existing housing units got into foreclosure. California, we're talking about 6 or 7. So first of all, we got thrown in to the highest classification that is colored in this diagram. What we actually had was a pretty even problem all across the state. It wasn't isolated in just one area. It was pretty consistent throughout the state that we had high levels of foreclosures given the number of housing units we have. Not as bad as New Jersey, which simply shows up almost the whole state. So this is a number of foreclosures per 1,000 occupied housing units. So yes, the problem, at least at a fairly high level, was consistent through the state of Tennessee. One reason we'll get to later involves Shelby County, which has an extremely large number of foreclosures relative to the rest of the state. And the rest, but even in Davidson County, we still had foreclosures of 0.8 or more. Now, the actual reasons for each of these divisions, I'm not sure about. But compared to the other states, we had a pretty widespread impact across the state in foreclosures given the number of housing units almost everywhere in the state. It wasn't as bad as California. California, we're talking about 5 or 6 foreclosures per 1,000 occupied units. We were at the low end. We probably just made this classification by just a little, by the 0.8. Now, why we were 0.8 everywhere in many places, I'm not sure why that's true.
I don't want to be picky, but it looks like we're awfully red compared to Mississippi and Alabama, and they were in the same category as we were on
and it might have something to do with zip codes, because these are all based on zip codes. So they could be rural areas that are fairly big zip code, but not many housing units, so it gets a little complicated there. But I will check on that, find something a little more tangible. All right, why did everybody get so depressed? Well, we've got a graph here with the total value of the whole U.S. housing stock over time and the total value of all outstanding mortgage debt at the same time. Now, total mortgage debt at the end of 2013 was almost $10 trillion. All the mortgage, first mortgage, second mortgage, third mortgage debt owned by all homeowners. Now, what happened there is the feeling that we were so much wealthier at the time. You look at that graph and you'll see that about 2005, 2006, the total value of home equity in homes reached its peak. And that's when people basically felt they could go out and go ahead and get an extra home loan mortgage on it and spend the money. It fell, and it still hasn't recovered. One of the problems is the total value of home equity by homeowners hasn't recovered since the collapse in the housing market. It's still down about 28%. Same is true, of course, as the total number of employed people has yet to recover from the peaks that we had back in 2006. Fortunately, the stock market has recovered a little, but in terms of employment and the total net worth you feel you have in your households, it still hasn't recovered from where it was. The stock market, despite the last few days, has recovered. In fact, the stock market started recovering early 2009. It took a while to get back, but it at least started early. The housing recovery in terms of prices didn't start till about 2011, 2012. So it's been a slow response, slow recovery in terms of housing prices and people's net worth. All right, how do we get into the bubble? Well, number one, a lot of people got burnt during the dot-com crash. They got burnt out by investing in equities, and they were looking for something else to get into, and housing, history of housing prices never falling, attracted people to invest more just because they needed some alternative to the equity market in which many of them got burnt. We had the recession after the dot-com bust. The Fed tried to come in and help the economy. And one of the ways they help the economy is by reducing interest rates. So if you were looking for an alternative to equities and interest rates were falling, it also kind of provided incentive to get into, a little more actively get into real estate if you could. And then there's this growing fever as more and more people got into it. And one of the problems is we don't have a lot of examples of gigantic bubbles and good explanations. It's almost forensically, if you go in and try to figure out, how do people get drawn into these things? At what point does it turn into a fever versus just a reasonably uptick or downtick in what's going on? And economists don't have really good theories about human behavior when it comes to want to get involved in this, want to play part of, I want to ride this thing up like my friends are, heard it at the club, heard it from my cousin. People just got pulled into getting involved in real estate. We also have the GSAs. That's government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie and Freddie. Everybody probably is not as familiar with Fannie and Freddie after I am after reading all I've read. These are the two largest federally involved institutions that have provided stability and access to long-term mortgage money over a long period of time. And long-term mortgage money was initially very hard to get off the ground. I mean, there weren't a lot of people willing to lend you hundreds of thousands of dollars for 30 years. In other words, tie up an investment for 30 years for you to get a mortgage to buy a house. So over the years, basically Fannie started out in 1938. Freddie joined the government-sponsored enterprises in 1970. They were challenged to basically provide long-term money in some kind of stable environment and access to long-term money so people could more easily obtain mortgages and own their own homes. And they did that by getting into the business of pooling mortgages. Fannie and Freddie are the two biggest buyers of home mortgages. When you get a home mortgage, you get it from what we call the originator, or a broker who works for an originator. You go and you show up one day and you sign your name 1,000,000 times and you walk out the door. And you've got your mortgage, you've got your money to pay to buy a new house. Well, that broker probably dries that ink in a matter of minutes and sells it. They make money right off the bat. They don't put that mortgage loan is not kept on their books for the most part. They're not going to sit there with that as an asset for the rest of their lives. They sell it to somebody, and the primary buyer of home mortgages is Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And that is the way, in fact, that they basically provide basically the money for people, for the banks to get money to actually make loans available to you. Freddie and Fannie buy the mortgages, so the bank gets some money right off the bat. As soon as that ink is dried, they can sell it. And nowadays you get a letter that says, your loan is now owned by Fannie or Freddie. Fannie and Freddie then pool a bunch of them. They get 1,000 mortgages, and they pool them into a security. And they sell that to people who would like to buy that security. And I'll tell you why they'll like to buy the security. Fannie and Freddie will take these mortgages. It's collateral for a brand new instrument, just like a bond. Money comes into the bond from your monthly payments and mortgages, so money is flowing into the bond because it basically consists of all these little mortgages. People will buy this new mortgage-backed security, or a piece of it. They'll invest in it because it's triple rated, because Fannie and Freddie guarantee that payments into this security if the homeowners themselves default in any way. So that's great. It's insured for their payments of interest and principal. I'll buy a mortgage-backed security because it's triple rated and it pays more than treasuries, which are also triple rated. And a lot of entities, financial entities, have to basically invest in very secure securities, like triple rated bonds. So instead of buying a treasury, which would be a very secure investment, they'll buy a mortgage-backed security because it's AAA and it basically offers higher interest rates. So there's a market for this stuff. Now, at one point in 2006 and 2007, mortgage-backed securities outstanding exceeded the total volume of corporate bonds in the United States and the total volume of U.S. government securities, and most people don't understand it. It was a significant financial instrument in the financial structure of the United States, bigger than bonds, bigger than Treasury securities. And again, Fannie and Freddie initially were the primary issuers of these mortgage-backed securities until the late, just before the crash. Up to 2003, they bought most of the mortgages that people took out, gave the initial originator a quick profit when it was sold, and then they bunched them together and sold them as mortgage-backed securities. And people all over the world would buy these things. Foreign countries, insurance agencies, the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, everybody buys this stuff. It's a good return, it's safe, and you have to hold part of your portfolio in safe items. And of course, Congress got involved in putting pressure on banks. The Community Redevelopment Act has been stated sometimes as the main reason everything collapsed, but banks were under pressure in certain areas for denying reasonable mortgages in minority areas, and certain banks got pressure on them to hold and make available mortgages to certain groups. And in fact, in certain areas, a lot of these types of mortgages were made. When it was all over, these mortgages fared much better than the mortgages which were to come in 2004, 2005, and 2006, which were bad subprime loans. But the whole market in one way or another was impacted. Congress, to a certain extent, got involved and probably That's why most people believe if you're looking for someone to blame, you blame everybody. You blame the borrowers, you blame the initial originators, you blame the people who service the loans, you blame Fannie and Freddie, you blame Congress. There is no end to who is guilty in all of this, and it'll be something to be studied for years. And like a lot of things, it's hard to just point your finger at one thing. To understand why it took so long to clear out the mess once it did bust, you have to understand the individual players, and I'll go through them quick. Obviously, there were the borrowers. And during the mid-2000s, more investors got involved in this because the investors are saying, hey, prices of houses only can go up. If I can just somehow get a little loan, I can get involved in this. And what you had happen was you had a rising, not extremely high, but you had a rising number of mortgages that went to investors, not those who were planned on occupying the homes themselves. You're an investor, you bought a house, you rent it out for a couple of years, figure I'll hold on for 2 or 3 years and I'll sell it at a profit because look what's going on with the housing prices. That caused part of the problems. The originators are the ones who actually made the loan that you signed your names on and then walked out of their office, or a brokerage firm that worked with a financial institution that basically provided the funds. Originators, of course, made money right off the bat when they sold that to Freddie, or later on to private businesses that got into the business. The servicers, when you write your mortgage check every month, it might go to the bank from which you actually got the original mortgage. It might go to somebody else. The servicer just is the one that opens the envelope, gets the interest and the principal payments and maybe the property tax payments for some people who pay mortgages, and they send them off to the right people, whoever basically owns the mortgage, or to local tax collectors in the case of property taxes. And they get paid for their service. They get paid a certain percent of the outstanding mortgage debt that they service. So they make money. The servicer could be the originator, could be somebody else. Then you get the securitizers, the government-sponsored enterprisers, who basically pull these things into a large block of mortgages and then issue a security with the income generated from the mortgages servicing the security. So if you own part of a mortgage-backed security, the income you're receiving is basically from the mortgage payments people are making. To complicate matters, though, Wall Street had to get into some really, really strange, complex securities. Collateralized debt obligations, synthetic collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps. All of these things, there was nobody in many cases overseeing many of these new strange types of securities that Wall Street was issuing and persuading the rating agencies to put AAAs on them. The worst declines in values did not come so much from the mortgage-backed securities, but from these other things. It consisted of mortgage-backed securities, student loan debt, auto debt, credit card debt. They were mixed up pieces of securitizations that included a lot of different kinds of debt obligations, which generated income, which would then go to whoever owned these securities. But those basically wound up being some of the biggest problems because they included a lot of subprime stuff. So you got another group, the securitizer. You had the investors who bought these securities. You, not likely, because these things usually came out in $100 or $1 million denominations, but you could buy part of a multi-million-dollar mortgage-backed security, and pension funds bought them, nice and secure, AAA rated. Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System bought some of them, probably lost some money too, like everybody else, when some of them went decline in value. Financial institutions, Fannie and Freddie own and held a bunch of these things themselves. They securitized some of them and hold them in their own portfolio. Other countries, state and local governments invest in this stuff too. Very secure alternative to U.S. Treasury securities. The trustee was the person in charge of the security once it was pooled and securitized. He was responsible to make sure that the individual investors got the money that came to him from the servicers. So you pay your mortgage, the servicer took the money, sent it to the trustee. The trustee is the one that basically made payments to the individual part owners of securities. That's what happened. These securities were so big, hundreds of millions of dollars, you could buy you could buy a piece of it, and you got a piece of the monthly payments that were made. So the trustee was in charge, had responsibilities to the individual investors, not to the individual mortgage borrower. He had no particular relationship to the original mortgage borrower, just to the investors in the security who bought the security or pieces of it. Then the other people who played a role were the taxpayers, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury, who ultimately got called in when bailout time came. So we had all these different players, and they all didn't have the same interests. The problems are clear now. Various levels of ignorance by everybody, especially this continuous belief that housing prices could never decline, which explains a lot what on. The number of subprime loans. So subprime loan is simply, obviously, the easy explanation is one that's not prime, but that's not really helpful. Prime loans generally are ones that conform to what Freddie and Fannie say they want when they'll be willing to buy a loan from some originator. And usually it's capped at some amount of money. It used to be $417,000, and they've raised it now to $600-something thousand at big locations, or New York City or something. They wanted a certain amount of down payment. They wanted paperwork done per what they require. They want reasonable levels of loan to house value. There were a lot of inflated, ridiculous home values during the Wild West days here. They wanted some work to make sure that the mortgage payment didn't exceed a certain percent of a family's income. So they wanted some paperwork done before they were willing to buy that particular mortgage and add it to a securitization. What happened was, after 2003, there were so many great creditors out there who borrowed money, and eventually you ran out of the best, and you had to start dipping down. And after 2003, some of the private companies started offering mortgages to people whose credit ratings weren't as so good, and we call those subprime. So they would basically make money available to some subprime buyers who clearly had some problems, credit problems, poor credit ratings. They've had some problems in the past. The documentation wasn't complete. The loan to value of the house were very high. One of the reasons you lend somebody money is you're lending them an amount that's usually lower than the value of the house. So when things go wrong, you can get back most of what you lent them, and the homeowner himself is going to be the one that loses the equity that he had in it. Well, some of these loans were almost for 100% of the value of the house. Well, it wouldn't take much of a fall in the value of housing to wipe out some of the money you've lent them, because if the value falls too far, then there's nothing left to pay off the mortgage. More of these mortgages started being made. More of these mortgages started being made where the amount of the mortgage payment exceeded the likely volume of the income of the family. And then a lot of these loans that were made had tricks to them. You got the teaser rates up front, and in 2 years you got a reset, and it went from 4% to 7%. And you would want to get a loan like that if you thought housing values would keep going to go up. No big deal. By the time it resets, I'll have another $50,000 in equity in my home because of the rising home prices. Lots of reasons people went after some of these kind of newfangled mortgages. There was very little regulation of some of the financial players. While the major banks had some regulation, the FDIC and the Fed, a lot of them did not, especially the investment banking firms that got into this. Here's what happened. Here's a percent of the non-prime lending that occurred during this period, the late 90s and 2000. And what happened is the subprime lending represented a relatively small share of the loans that were being made. And through 2003, in 2003, it was only about 10% of the new loans that were made were considered subprime. All of a sudden, 2004, 2005, 2006, subprime loans jumped, and it was primarily because of a lot of the financial institutions. I'm sorry.
Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You speak of a lack of regulation.
Yes.
And obviously looking at this, it appears everything started happening in 2004. Was there any particular change in regulation, either in 3 or in 4, that
No, what happened was more of the investment banks decided that this was a business they could get into and make money. Because again, if you could persuade someone to, if you could make some subprime loans and persuade someone to buy them, then you got them off your books, you made money. And what happened in these days is the types of clients that now were coming in weren't the best as they had been in the past. There were so many good creditors out there. You had more people coming in wanting a loan who had some documentation problems, or they had no income history, or the loan to value ratios was pretty high. In other words, the risk, the underlying risk was getting higher. The mortgage bankers decided if they could, they'd be willing to make these mortgages available, but they had to have faith that they could sell the mortgages to somebody else. And they did by using all sorts of devices to make, when they pooled the mortgages, they just didn't pool a bunch of subprime mortgages. They had good mortgages, they had medium kind of mortgages, and then they had some of the toxic stuff. And if they pooled it right, if 80% of the loans were, let's say, prime, and 20% were subprime, you could get a rating that still looked good because it looked like the average type of loan in this bundle of securities was primarily prime. But you still had a growing volume of subprime loans that started being pooled into the mortgages starting in 2004, 2005, and 2006. And they managed to get the credit rating agencies to rate this stuff AAA, because, again, they basically felt that no matter what it was, housing values couldn't decline. And if housing values can't decline, even if it's a risky loan, well, you'll take it back and sell it. If you can get your money back out of it, and everybody had this mentality that housing values couldn't decline, then even the financial institutions figured we can make money here and don't have to worry about it. If there's defaults, well, we'll still get most of our money back because we got the house behind it. And as long as you felt, everybody felt that housing values were going to rise, then you had a way of making more money. So it was, again, it wasn't just that the individual borrowers kind of got hoodwinked. It was the financial companies themselves. And we'll see in a minute that they got hoodwinked, and a lot of them disappeared because they felt no matter what, even if it was a risky loan, they still had the house to go after. And as long as the house value didn't decline or stayed about the same, they were covered. They made their money selling the loan, and they could get it back in case of default.
I understand what you're saying, but it just seems to me that there was such a dramatic change that started in 2004. And as I recall, and my memory is failing me more and more each day, that the economic circumstances were very, very good earlier than that.
They were still good. We hadn't covered, the recession didn't begin until late 2007.
Right, I understand that, but I'm just saying it seems like there was a dramatic change in attitude in the private sector, and I'm most of the time that happens, there has been some change in public policy, and that's the only question I had. It just seemed like it was a dramatic.
I found no major change in public policy towards these basically unregulated financial institutions, other than they saw a way of making more money, which is what they do. All right, it didn't fare well for the big boys. It didn't fare well for almost anybody. Now, obviously, it didn't fare well for the borrowers. We know that we had 10 million foreclosure filings over the last since property values peaked. We had 5 million actual foreclosures that were completed, and of course, we had many millions of people who lost their jobs. So it was certainly not a very good time for borrowers. It also was not a great time for the people who played a role in the financial sector. Here are the major players at the time and what happened to them when the bottom fell out. The investment banks, if you look at them, now Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley were in trouble, and what happened was we changed the federal rules and let them become commercial banks. Once they became commercial banks, then the Fed could help them. They were a commercial bank, and the Fed was running around like everybody else. This all happened in 1 year. Bear Stearns was the first one to go under, and it was bought by J.P. Morgan, saved. The rest of it almost happened in a collapse period starting in September when Lehman Brothers, that's the only thing left of Lehman Brothers, Lehman Brothers was almost saved on a weekend when things went critical, but all of a sudden it fell through a hole and it just went bankrupt because nobody wanted to take it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was there legislation that was put in place that allowed them to go from investment banks to commercial banks? Were they not restricted at one point?
Legislation didn't change because it happened so quick, but rules, if they're cleverly written, and I'll tell you what, the Federal Reserve System is doing stuff now that people say it's not somewhere in the legislation or the rules that allow them to do some of the things they're doing now. But they did have certain things in emergency situations that they could do, and the Treasury, the FDIC, the Fed, again, somewhere in the Fed, we will never fail again. They were worried about the same problem that happened in the Depression, that if too many of these big financial firms, many of which they didn't understand all the interconnections between these guys, and all these big firms were interconnected in ways that a lot of people didn't know. They felt that no matter what, they had to save them. And the Fed and the FDIC tried to save Lehman. They were brokering deals, trying to force and twist arm somebody to buy Lehman Brothers to come to their rescue, like they did for some of the other banks. And it fell apart at the last moment. Lehman was the only big one, finally, that just totally went bankrupt. The others were bailed out in various ways. Conservatorships for Freddie and Fannie got into trouble. They started securitizing some of the junk because they were under pressure to help the market. And the only market that was playing finally were subprime loans. The prime loans you ran out of good customers. There's so many good people with FICOs of 750, then 700. 620 used to be the cutoff for a FICO score, but then what do you do at 630 and 610? So you finally basically ran out of the good stuff. You had to go for some of the other stuff. And the Fannie and Freddie got pulled into the deal too, and they got in trouble, because they guaranteed payments of principal and interest. They wound up buying some of the junk. When the defaults started occurring, Fannie and Freddie had to insure them. They didn't have enough reserves when the defaults started coming in, and then houses started being sold and prices started falling. So the feds came in and put them in conservatorship, basically took them over, guaranteeing payments. They guaranteed Fannie and Freddie's insurance on principal and interest payments. Morgan Stanley also was turned into a commercial bank. And by commercial bank, all we mean is they probably kept doing what they were doing, but now they were depository institutions. You could get a checking account or a savings account with them. The big division there was, did they offer depository accounts or not? Merrill Lynch, boom, gone. Merrill Lynch got into credit default swaps and was holding a lot of the junk. Purchased by Bank of America, wound up being a good deal. Merrill Lynch has been very profitable for Bank of America. Lehman Brothers, gone. Zippo. Every pencil, pen, and everything in a little bag was sold and basically liquidated. And Bear Stearns had got in trouble earlier. They were just picked up by J.P. Morgan. Commercial banks, the big boys, Bank America, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan, Wachovia, Wells Fargo. Well, Bank America and Citigroup got bailed out by FDIC or the Fed. They made funds available to them in an emergency kind of situations that got them over the original scare, because everybody got scared, saying, all these guys must be in trouble. You start pulling your money out of commercial banks quick enough, and they're going to get into trouble. They're going to run into liquidity problems. J.P. Morgan Chase, of course, was very strong. J.P. Morgan, in fact, and I believe Wells Fargo at the time, did not want to take any TARP money because they didn't need it. They didn't need it. They were forced to take the money because all the other guys needed it, and they didn't want it to appear that these guys were so strong and better institutions than the ones that needed it, so they forced everybody to take some TARP money. And it was basically money. They didn't buy bad assets. They just injected some cash into the banks until the worst was over. Wachovia, gone. Every time I drive through Brentwood, there used to be a Wachovia branch there in the corner. Now they finally, of course, put up the Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo took up Wachovia. Bought it, obviously at a nice discount. You don't take over someone's junk without getting some kind of discount deal with it. And Wells Fargo, of course, and the banks, the commercial banks who bought up other banks took them under their wings. You can see that their assets increased because all of a sudden they got all the depositors from these institutions that they bought. AIG, well, we basically nationalized AIG. The federal government basically said, you give us 60 or 70% of your stock, and we're going to give you enough money to get over your problem, which was you insured stuff for you insured all these people that they wouldn't lose money in real estate related activities, and you didn't have any reserve for it. You know, insurance companies have reserves. You buy life insurance, they put the money away, so they know they're going to have to pay it out at some point. AIG, this little branch out of a little office, was doing stuff that the main part of the company didn't know, and so we bailed them out by nationalizing them, essentially. Fannie and Freddie put into conservatorship, means the government, they are no longer a hybrid now. Fannie and Freddie are no longer stockholder-owned entities. And WAMU, the biggest saving and loans, belly up. Countrywide, belly up. These were the banks that notorious for what we call sell and get rid of. They originated mortgages and they got them off the books as fast as they could, and they drove their salespeople to move this stuff as fast as possible. And ultimately, they started basically getting rid of the most toxic of some of these mortgages came from WAMU and Countrywide and a few others, and they're just gone. Countrywide got bought out by Bank of America, their biggest problem. Bank of America is still paying for this big mistake they made with Countrywide, because people are suing Countrywide right and left, and if you now own Countrywide, you're going to have to pay the bill. So they regret that, I'm sure, every weekend. Slow resolutions. All these people involved were not buddies. The biggest problem was the servicers could handle servicing and originating loans very well. The originating loans was nothing. Remember, you go walk in, you sign it, it's gone, it's done, and they sold it to somebody, and somebody services your mortgage after that. The servicers were just all set up to service your payments. They come in, their interest over here, principal over there, property tax payments here, send them out. They weren't equipped for defaults that started coming in massive hundreds of thousands all of a sudden when the property values declined. They couldn't handle it. They were not set up to do it. They were just paid basically to open envelopes and take care of the normal distribution of the money as it came in. So part of the problem was it was not set up to handle a significant amount of defaults. Normally, defaults are built into all kinds of mortgages. You expect 1 or 2% maybe a year, but not what happened. So that was one of the problems right off the bat. They just couldn't handle the high volumes of defaults. Agreements. The servicer who handles the payments has an agreement with the person that put together this pooled mortgage-backed security. It sets out what the servicer can do and not can do. The servicer is the guy you've got to go to handle the defaults. When defaults happen, you've got to deal with the servicer. The servicer's got all sorts of contracts with the people that created that mortgage-backed security. It says, all right, you want to work out something that doesn't cost more than 2%, fine, but that's it. You can't do anything. Loan modification, principal reduction, nothing if it's going to reduce our losses to more than just 2%. So we've got these agreements. The servicer's got to follow the agreement. So the servicer isn't going to go out of his way to knock $100,000 off your mortgage or reduce your interest rate from 8% to 4% or extend the mortgage from 5 years to 30 years because he's got this agreement with the securitizers. So there's a conflict. It's not going to happen fast. The servicers and the trustees and the originators sometimes were the same people. This is not like lots of people. You've got Bank of America that's got a trust department that handles some mortgage-backed securities. They originate a lot of the loans, and they service a lot of the loans. So all of a sudden you've got the same entity involved in the same, doing different things. Branches of the same organization are handling all of these things, and they got into some problems with conflicts with each other. That's the way the business world works. Then you had the problem with a lot of people didn't like one mortgage alone. When the prices of homes were going up, they took out a home equity loan, and then they took out a home equity line of credit. So not only did you have a first lien on your property, you had a second lien on your property, and you had a third lien on your property. Well, if you all of a sudden sell a home in foreclosure, you sell it at the county steps, the money first goes to the first lien holders. If there's not enough money left over for the second lien holders and the third lien holders, tough. That's the way it goes. So the first lien holders got first shot at any money you could get out of a default that goes into a foreclosure. Well, the second and third lien holders could cause delays. The second and third lien holders sometimes were the same organization that was the first mortgage holder. So what do you think in Bank of America would happen if you owe a first mortgage of $100,000 and then their home equity department's got a second lien on you for $50,000? Well, the branch that has the second lien isn't going to be over-enthused about you basically trying to sell the house to the first lien. The other branch gets the first mortgage paid off, and then they have to report a loss of $50,000 on the second mortgage. So you had conflicts between the various lien holders that was very common during this time. We had an extremely large percent of people with first mortgages who had second and third mortgages to boot. Complicated the whole situation, drug out any kind of resolution. So the reasons for a lot of the frustrating time it took for this thing to resolve itself is because of all the different interests that were involved in the whole situation. Players, the borrowers, the banks, the securitizers, the trustees, the investors. Investors wouldn't be enthused about trying to sell off a piece of property that was involve a loss. And finally, you had disagreements about the investors in some of this stuff. Some of these mortgage-backed securities didn't have equal. I mean, you all didn't get an equal share of what was coming in. We had some people who wanted to be guaranteed that they would never lose anything. So they had a piece of the bond. They call it a tranche. They had a piece of the security that was the last one to lose if something bad happened. Then you had the guys who were a little more risk takers. They got a little better return. But if something went wrong, they took the hit first. So now you've got a conflict between the senior people, the senior tranche people, and the junior tranche people about trying to settle things too quick. The junior people didn't want things basically solved quickly because maybe in the long run, most of these things would be paid back. In the short run, the losses would be felt by the junior tranche people. They would lose everything first, and the senior tranche people wouldn't lose anything because they're the ones protected by this buffer. Junior loses first, senior loses last. So you had conflicts amongst the owners, the investors in this mortgage-backed securities that drew things out. There was no quick way of resolving selling a piece of property and moving on with your life. And that is probably the saddest thing, and I'm not sure there's anything we could have done about it except what we're now involved in, of course, is Dodd-Frank, is the federal law that's trying to deal with all the bad things that existed out there. So maybe we won't have to go through this again. Thank you. Sorry it took so long. Complicated.
Well, Stan, if we'd had your analysis 7 or 8 years ago, perhaps it could have been averted.
I forgot to mention 2 winners, at least, in all of this. It has to be winners.
And the winners are?
The winners are, there was one investment firm smart enough to get together and say, these prices can't keep going up. It's impossible for these prices to keep going up. And, of course, what you do is they bought a bunch of credit default swaps on the worst crap that they could identify. They had people who went out and searched through all these documents to find the mortgage-backed securities and the collateral debt obligations that were the most likely to fail if housing prices basically fell. And they bought insurance, so if those things fell, they had to be paid. That firm, that hedge fund, made $13 billion. We had another by an ex-doctor from Vanderbilt who was an eccentric who started his own hedge fund out in California that actually read through all these the prospectuses that identified all the stuff and where he could go and find more detail, and he finally basically could identify which ones were most likely going to fail based on the content of what they were holding. And despite his investors who fought him tooth and nail, he hung in there and he made $1 billion for his investors.
And is he going to retire in Tennessee?
Well, I don't think he's practicing medicine because he doesn't have to. I don't know what happened.
We're number one for retirement. And that's
all in the
details. Person we want.
Right.
And that's why. Thank you very much, Stan. That's great. Any other questions for, yes, sir, Mr. McMahon?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say between Stan and David, I've been taken to school this morning.
Amen.
And this report was just outstanding, and it certainly explains the mess that I'm in personally with my mortgage. Having got one in 2004, thank you, Mr. Odom, for bringing that question up. I really appreciate it. No, I really loved this report. It was very thorough, and it really gave some perspective.
Good work.
I
Thank
didn't
you.
have. Thank you very much, both of you.
All right, before we conclude, we need to consider dates for our next meeting in June. There are 2 tranches suggested there. Yeah, it's one of my favorite words. In this space, we have the June 11th and 12th is a number of people have said they're available then and not the later. So unless there's objection, let's just go with the 11th and 12th. Wonderful. And Lanice, would you any parting words?
No, I'm just delighted that it won't be on my birthday this year.
Well, we can deal with that. All right. Anything further for the good of the order? That's right. Thank you all so much. If there's nothing further, then we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.